The Differently Brained team acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we record, edit, and stream this podcast. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples and their elders past, present, and emerging. We extend that respect to all First Nations cultures and their ongoing connection to the lands, waterways, and communities. Let's get into it. And welcome to another episode of Differently Brained, the podcast where no brain is the same. I'm Jacinta Dietrich.
And I'm Lachlan Rutherford, and we have a treat for you today. We've got a wonderful guest, Adele Dumont, who is an Australian writer and critic. And her work has appeared in the Griffith Review, Meanjin, Southerly, ABR, and Sydney Review of Books. And Adele's first book, No Man is an Island, is an account of her experiences teaching English to asylum seekers in detention. Her second book, and what we're going to be discussing today, The Pulling, is a work of memoir charting her experience of trichotillomania. Bit of a shared connection there. Thank you for coming in today, Adele.
Thank you both for having me on the show.
Just to start off with, in the book, you mentioned that you prefer the term pulling rather than trichotillomania. We prefer to use the languages that our guests prefer to use. Can you talk us through your preference for wanting to say pulling rather than trichotillomania?
Sure. I guess it's not that I mind you or anybody else using the word trichotillomania. It's more, I think in the book I say internally, I don't use that word. I guess because I developed the condition before I knew that it was a condition.
Yeah.
And hence, I was just used to thinking of it as pulling. And I guess the other thing is trichotillomania is like a very long, quite ugly, clinical, pathologizing kind of word. Whereas for me, pulling, obviously, it's about the pulling of the hair physically, but it's also that the mental urge, the mental pull, if you like, to carry out the compulsion.
Yeah. My psychologist, when we were discussing my trichotillomania once, he was stumbling over the word for a good while, and eventually he just called it tricky. I typically don't say, oh, I have trichotillomania to people. I'll say, oh, I pull my hair out. And that's, it's easier to describe, I guess.
Yeah. And the other thing is, even if you do use the word, I mean, I've used the word with doctors and they kind of look at me blankly and they go, and then they kind of reach for Google.
Yeah.
So, it's not necessarily even understood when you do use the word.
As an outsider who doesn't have the common thread here, and for people who haven't had a chance to read the book yet, since this is out on publication day, woohoo, what does the pulling feel like for you? Both the physical pulling and the urge, the pull to pull, I guess.
Strangely enough, I feel like an outsider might assume that the physical act of removing hair, I mean, I remove hair from my scalp, they might assume that it's a painful process. And for me, it's never, ever been painful. In fact, I experience it as quite pleasurable and satisfying. And I don't quite know why that is, because the strange thing is, like, occasionally I might catch my hair in an elastic, or I don't know, like have a Band-Aid and need to, rip it off. And like, then I can feel the pain. But for some reason, when I'm doing it consciously and in such a focused way, that, there is no pain involved. And in terms of that mental pull, it is extremely, extremely compelling.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how when I do tell people about the condition, they ask, "But doesn't that hurt?" Like my hairdresser's like, "Doesn't it hurt?" and whatever.
Yes.
And yeah, it really never hurts me when I pull my hair. And also, this is kind of maybe confronting for the listeners, but when I have pulled so much that I've started developing sores on my scalp, and then I pick at those, that doesn't hurt either. It's just kind of, it's something else entirely. When I pull at my beard, when I pull at my arm hairs or my legs or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that's enough to make me
Wince.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think, because I'd already spoken to Lachlan, I knew it didn't hurt for him. But when reading the book, it's so interesting to me because I'll be honest, like, I understand that this is probably not appropriate. I did rip a few of my hairs out just to see.
Uh-huh.
It hurts like all hell.
Uh-huh.
And so that's one of the things that I'm just so intrigued about how it doesn't hurt, but that on other body hair does. And just, the interesting way that clearly your brain just gets very different stimulation when you're in that moment, I guess.
Yes, when you enter that state. And like generally speaking, I'm actually very sensitive to pain. Yeah, so I don't quite understand the mechanism there.
Yeah. I do like in the book how you state that it doesn't hurt you, but then mention that this is something that would absolutely hurt you, the reader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put that in there because I did have a couple of readers early on read it and comment that it was painful for them to read, and purely because I don't know, like I imagine if I'm reading something, for example, about somebody self-harming, I imagine it's a similar kind of response where I just kind of recoil from the page because I can't really identify with it. Yeah, so I thought I have to insert somewhere that like I acknowledge that this might seem painful for you, but for me it's not at all. Yeah.
It felt very much to me, and this is on me, absolutely, when the waiter puts a hot plate down and they say don't touch it, it's hot, even though you'd said like this will hurt you if you try it. I was like,
Yeah.
I gotta know for myself. And yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that's a really good point and something that I hadn't considered. But I love that you added that in because you're right. Without maybe that acknowledgement of, it doesn't hurt for me, yes, it would hurt for you, it might feel like a confronting self-harm kind of book. And to be fair, like, it is very confronting in a lot of different ways. I was talking to Lachlan earlier about it, but for me, it was mostly I just felt like you'd let us in so much that I felt like I needed to step away and give book you some privacy every once in a while. Like, it wasn't that it was too hard to read or anything. It was just every once in a while I felt that you let it be so intimate and you shared so much with the reader that I had to like step away and pause and be like, Book Adele needs some she shared a lot, she needs a break. It was a really, really interesting experience. Yeah. And I know Lachlan found it similarly.
Yeah, because it was relatable.
Yeah.
I was reading stuff and I was like, oh man, am I in a therapy session? This is unlocking some things for me. But yeah, no, it's everyone read the book, please. Read the book.
Yeah, I mean, it was tricky for me to know like how far to go. There's aspects of my pulling behavior that, yeah, I'm quite sure an outsider would find confronting, like you say, Jacinta, or even disgusting. And so, like that, there was a dilemma there. Like, do I include this stuff? But because for me, like, a lot of my experience has been one of shame. So yeah, I felt like I had to go to those places. Otherwise, it's like, well, maybe someone will accept these aspects, like these, curated aspects of it. But if they knew the full truth, then they wouldn't accept me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I felt like I had to put that. And also just to convey the strangeness of the condition and the extremity of it.
Absolutely. And for people who are looking for common representation, like, I'm sure you probably already thought about this and I'm just telling you things you already know, but if you didn't share all of that, it'd potentially be spotted by other people who pull, and maybe they wouldn't feel it was as authentic, or maybe they'd be able to spot the missing pieces. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that'd be something that, if I was reading something about an autistic character or something and I felt like there was intentionally bits withheld or missing, I think that I would spot that, and then I wouldn't feel as connected, and maybe I'd feel a little bit let down that it wasn't the full representation of everything.
Yeah.
Do you think that because it's such an underrepresented condition, both in terms of how many people are diagnosed, but also how often it's talked about. The fact that you're unable to necessarily draw connections with other people who might have the same thing. And you said in the book that you thought that it was just you who had this and no one else, that you have to keep secret. Do you think that the lack of representation of trichotillomania or pulling is part of the shame?
Yes, definitely. I feel like shame when it comes to this condition is kind of multifaceted. I think part of it, at least for me, is the sense, even though it might not be accurate, but the sense that you're doing this to yourself. I feel like that's a big part of the shame for me. Whereas, there are other illnesses that just happen to people and that are totally out of their control. But yeah, for me, there's a battle there where I'm like, I should be able to stop this. Why can't I stop this? There's something wrong with me that I'm not able to stop doing this strange thing. Yeah, and I mean, from what I've read of other people with this condition, yeah, the isolation and the secrecy, I mean, all of that just feeds the compulsions, really. So it becomes this vicious cycle. And yeah, because people generally, and even medical professionals, don't really know that it's a thing, or even if they've heard of it, they might think it's quite a trivial or a benign thing. Yeah, you kind of keep the reality of it to yourself.
Just going back to what you said earlier about the shame of doing it to yourself and thinking, that you could just stop doing it, or that other people have got conditions that are quote unquote bestowed upon them by external stimuli or brain chemicals or whatever. It's interesting to me that while we have trichotillomania, that the default is to be like, it's kind of trivial, it doesn't really matter that much. And then at the same time, like with my depression, I often feel like that as well. I could just think different, like it seems to be. And you mentioned in the book about the comorbidity between trichotillomania, depression, and anxiety. And I wonder, there's got to be some sort of overlap with them in terms of how we view ourselves as being, and this is a bad way to phrase it, but being worthy of having these conditions. You know what I mean? Like, we could just snap our fingers and change our minds because it's something we do to ourselves.
I think that's a really common experience across a lot of, I definitely think in our community, but in the mental health space and the neurodivergent space generally, though, is I think that's something that comes up time and time again, that regardless of, and not to trivialize your experience, guys, or to, take away from it or anything, but I do think it comes up of, that's how we treat so much of mental health, that if you just exercised more, if you just had better self-control, you'd be fixed. And I think it's something that, we treat mental health so differently to physical health. People don't say, oh, just walk on your broken leg kind of thing. But, I definitely feel, especially with the ADHD part of myself, of I could definitely just do the dishes if I tried harder and things like that. And I think that's, as much as it's, a personal situation, I do think that is something that is put onto people with mental health. I don't want to use the word challenges or whatever, but it's put onto you of an individual responsibility, a personal responsibility, a personal failing, rather than getting support and actually looking into things and understanding it better. It's just, oh, well, you go deal with that by yourself. You could fix it, you just don't want to try hard enough.
Yeah, and I think that's especially true for trichotillomania, because you're doing it with your own hands.
Yeah.
It feels like something so basic and something that, a child is in control of. Like, still now, like, I've had the condition for 20 years and still now I beat myself up about why can't I control this very basic thing.
Yeah.
I think that was such a strength about your book as well, because again, as an outsider, at no point did I think, oh, well, Adele could fix this for herself or anything like that. Like, you've done such a good job of bringing people into your mental space and really explaining the whole experience, that at no point at all did I think, there's an easy fix for this, or that, you lacked willpower or self-control or anything like that. Like, the reader was very much in there with you, where absolutely, like, if anyone comes out of this book and thinks pulling could be handled with better willpower, like, then they haven't read the book. It's just, I think that's, the big strength of it, especially as someone who's outside. I like to think that I'm empathetic, and at no point have I thought, oh, Lachlan could just stop pulling if he wanted to. But you just make that so clear, and how exhausting and fatiguing that constantly is.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I think that's a really special part of the book, that not only do you share this experience with the reader, but you really, really, really bring us into it.
Yeah, that's really great to hear, Jacinta, because sometimes I imagine myself as someone without this condition, and I imagine hearing about it, and it would sound so kind of unbelievable. Yeah, like almost fake, really, or something invented.
Yeah.
Not something that could possibly actually monopolize your entire life. Something like this tiny, tiny gesture.
I want to piggyback of what Jacinta was saying about how the writing is such that you never feel as though the onus is on you to change things up or whatever. The thing that I really appreciated, and I'm going to be appreciating a lot of things throughout this episode, by the way, but the thing that I really appreciated was how you were able to describe it as kind of being conscious of what you're doing, and being aware of the sensation, but still like not really being able to prevent doing it, kind of thing. I and this is the thing, like, I'm trying to explain it now myself and I can't. And that's why the book is so like important, for being able to describe what it is actually like for a lot of people, what it's like for me, for example. I know what I'm doing. I'm not, I don't lose some sort, I don't go into a fugue state and then suddenly I've got a hand fistful of hair or whatever. I know what I'm doing. I hate that I'm doing it, but I don't stop myself. It's weird. It's a strange thing to do.
Yes, it is. It is very weird. Like, sometimes it's likened to something like a tic or to Tourette's.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I understand about those conditions, they seem to me, or they seem involuntary. Those kind of repetitive movements. Whereas, that is the strange thing about our condition, is that you have some degree of control, but that seems to fluctuate. And like, sometimes I have the urges and I am able to stop them, but other mostly I'm not. I remember, like, once I had this psychologist and he asked me, when you have that thought, like, oh, I can just pull one hair and then stop, is that ever the case? Can you just pull one hair and stop? And I said to him, yeah, actually that has happened. Sometimes I've pulled one hair and I've been able to stop. And he stopped, and he's like, I thought that was a good thing. And he stopped and he said to me, that's really dangerous. I said, why? He said, because now your mind is going to hold on to that and use it to justify every time. And every time I tell myself I can just pull one and then I'll be able to stop. And it doesn't matter the fact that I've gone through that mental process like thousands upon thousands of times. Still my mind will find a way to justify it.
Yeah, that's it. Like, so when I first started, I was pulling from the back of my hair, and I don't pull from there anymore. It's more sort of like the left side of my head and the crown area and stuff. And I often will like use those many justifications, like, well, at least it's moving around the head rather than being focused on the one part at the back, or at least I've gone, X number of days without pulling. I can get away with it.
The justifications are crazy.
Yes.
Or sometimes if I'm having a particularly good stretch where I might have gone like a week without pulling, or even a week without having urges, then I'll tell myself, oh, like, you're getting better, Adele. Let's just like confirm for yourself that you're better. by touching your hair and like just pulling a little bit and then like showing yourself that you're able to stop. And then of course like that doesn't work, it escalates.
Yeah.
Or even like writing this book, another justification my mind came up with was you can't stop completely because like the writing won't be as good basically. Like, you need to keep pulling to like keep it fresh in your mind, and then you'll be able to write about it, you know, more truly, more vividly. So like there's you can't stop yet. Like you have to wait.
It's like an addiction mentality almost. Well, not almost,
100%.
it is.
Yeah, it is. Yes. Yeah, in fact, mentally I think there's lots of parallels to say gambling addiction or substance addiction.
Well, this is fantastic, and we're going to be right back after a quick break to ask Adele some more questions. See you in a minute.
Here at Differently Brained, we are huge advocates for our local book industry. We love our Aussie authors, our Aussie publishers, and our Aussie booksellers. And though we do favour the in-store experience of a local indie, we know that isn't always the most accessible way to get your book fix. So we've partnered with Booktopia, the biggest online book retailer in the country, to make sure that when you can't get to the books will come to you. With all the latest releases and old favourites, Booktopia has everything you're looking for. Best of all, they stock all the books by our wonderful podcast guests and even have my little novella too. By purchasing through our link, not only do you support a local author, but also help our little pod too. So next time you're on the hunt for your next read, head to the link in our show notes and grab yourself a little treaty or two. Amazing. We are back from our little break with Adele. And I wanted to ask, this is something that was really stood out for me in the book. So I'm going to quote your book back to you. I'm sorry. But you mentioned that your symptoms have been variously labeled a mental condition, a psychiatric disease, a rare disease. What do you think of it as?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, rare, I think, is questionable. I think we still label it that way because it's so unfamiliar to so many people.
Yeah.
But when you look at the figures, I know, Lachlan, I think you quoted a figure of 4%. I've read it could be between 0.5 to 2. You know, even if it's 0.5%, like that actually is quite prevalent.
Yeah.
So it's comparable to something like bipolar or schizophrenia, which, you know, are much more widely known. In answer to your question, I mean, I do consider it a mental illness.
Yeah, fair enough. I knew that you used pulling when you thought about it yourself, but yeah, mental illness, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Lachlan, what do you think of it as?
Mental illness, yeah. I've used the word condition multiple times now. Only because it's in conversation easy to say. I've got this condition, you know. I don't think about it enough, to be honest. Like, well, that's not true. I think about it all the time. It kind of consumes a lot of my mental and temporal energy, but I haven't really delved much into doing anything to treat it. I've got some professional help, but not a lot. And it's interesting, just to lead into the next question. You said that you didn't seek professional help because you saw it as cheating. How were you able to move past that kind of feeling and essentially seek out and accept professional help?
Yeah, it's true that for years at the start of my illness, and I developed it when I was only a teenager, actually the thought of seeking help didn't even occur to me. Like, that sounds strange to say now, but I think at the time, like, we're talking early 2000s and we're talking kind of outer suburbia rather than inner city where I am now. Yeah, mental illness was just not spoken about. And yeah, like I'd never come across anybody who'd been to a psychologist, whereas now I feel like it's you know, almost standard for people to be seeing somebody. Basically, what prompted me to see a psychologist in the end was really just desperation and exhaustion. Yeah, it wasn't that I, you know, managed to educate myself or convince myself or anything like that. It was really just I got to the point where, I needed help.
Yeah. Fair enough. I think that's probably the case for many people because it's
Mm.
such a, as you said, this. I mean, despite the fact that now it seems to be par for the course that everyone's seeing a psychologist, there's still, and we've talked about it a lot of times on this podcast, there's still the stigma of being able to get through things yourself without help. That's like the ideal or whatever. So yeah, I reckon desperation's probably a pretty common thing
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and in my head, it was really something that I needed to solve for myself. And because when you've been battling something by yourself for so long, it's like, well, I can't see somebody now because then it's like I've just wasted all this time. Like I need to do it for myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because it seems like it's self-inflicted, maybe some part of you is like, yeah, it's self-inflicted, so I'm going to be the one to come
fix
up
it.
with the
Yeah.
solution. Yeah, to
Yeah.
fix it, not somebody else.
Yeah.
And I guess you've got that extra layer of the shame that you guys specifically feel and the fact that it's already very hard going to a person and talking about anything,
Mhm.
really. It's really confronting. So if you already feel like what you're doing is weird or disgusting or you're the only one that does it, even if you are seeing someone and talking about things, the urge to, like, for me, the urge to still hide stuff from a psychologist
Mhm.
is high because I still, like, I'm a people pleaser. I want their approval. And so I can imagine even getting to the point of sharing that with someone after you are already in psychologist sessions. I don't even know how you start that conversation.
Yeah, and the other thing about the system as it is in Australia is that it is a bit of a lottery who you happen to see.
Yep.
So like the person who I happened to be referred to, who was kind of attached to the local medical centre, was entirely inappropriate. Like he'd never had any experience of treating people with a condition. He was very kind of flippant. His main advice to me in that first session when I was utterly desperate was to sit on my hands and see how that, see if that helped.
Yeah. I've had all sorts of suggestions like, oh, just cut your hair really short. Like, I like my hair longer actually. But also, it'd come back and I'd be like, fantastic pulling time, you know? But
Yeah.
And you've been told a bunch of other stuff as well, like shove stuff in your hair, use mousse, use gel, use all those things as well, Lachlan.
yes, that's
Which
right.
for you're just like, yeah, great, my hair feels different. Now I need to pull that one out
Well,
because it feels wrong.
It works for a while and then, like, especially in mousse, it works for a while and then, yeah, it's like, this feels strange. These hairs are stuck together in a way that they're not meant to be. And kind of everything seems temporary.
Yes. Temporary. And then the other thing is that hair by its nature is always growing.
Yep.
So there's always kind of changes at play.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a static thing.
In our episode, Lachlan, we talked about perfectionism and you finding different hairs, and that was part of your pulling that they didn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
Adele, is that something that plays into your pulling of like the texture of the hair? Is that part of how you choose what gets pulled?
Yes, very much so. And I guess for an outsider, they might not think of individual hairs as having their own unique characteristics. But yeah, once you develop a kind of feel for it, yeah, my fingers, like it's like they have their own strange sense where they're able to detect if a particular hair is maybe a little bit thicker or somehow misshapen. Yeah, I mean it's hard to put into words because it feels very instinctual. Yeah, and then the other thing, and I know, Lachlan, this is a little different to your own pattern, but the other thing for me that's important is locating the roots of the hair. So, I mean, you can't tell if you're going to be able to successfully remove a root, but somehow my fingers have developed a sense for that. And so they're able to like zone in on a particular hair and sense that that's going to have a root attached, and then like pull out that particular hair.
One of the other questions that we get asked a lot when people write in about our Lachlan episode that I think people would want me to ask you, Adele, if you're comfortable answering it, is when you've pulled a hair,
Yeah.
do you drop it on the ground? Like, how do you dispose of the hair when you're done with it? And do you need to vacuum every day?
Yeah, like once the strange thing is like I'm obsessed with the hair when it's in my hand, but after that it holds no interest for me. So yeah, it will just fall to the floor, and then later on I'll kind of clean up the mess and like try to basically hide the fact that I've done anything.
Yeah. I don't remember if I said this in the episode or not, which is not great, but I don't remember. But when I pull strands out, I'll like ball it up into little tiny balls and drop it on the ground. And sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just pull and then it just falls and I don't care. But going back to the shame thing, if I see an area near where I've been sitting or whatever, which has got all these little balls of hair and whatnot, I feel the urge to immediately pick it all up. Not immediately, it's after it's all kind of accumulated. To pick it all up and get rid of it before anyone else sees, because I'm a pretty clean person, and I don't like having stuff on the ground. I don't like the ground being sort of messy or whatever. But B, it's the fact that it's my hair that I've pulled out of my head, and people who come to my house typically know that I've got this condition, and it's not that I try to pretend it doesn't exist. It's just that like I try to minimize its observable quality.
Yeah, the other strange thing about hair is that, you know, if it's attached to somebody's head, and especially if it's attached to a woman's head, then it has immense kind of symbolic significance, and it's a sign of beauty, vitality. But of course, once the hair is separated from the head, then like it's the same object, but it becomes like an object of disgust. I'm not sure if it was Margaret Mead, but someone famous in sociology calls it matter out of place.
Yes.
So yeah, it's like if you have a stray hair in a soup, you know, a bowl of soup, like it's absolutely revolting. Whereas that same object on the person's head is something beautiful.
Yeah, that was something that I hadn't ever considered, and that's probably because this is just so not my world, but I hadn't ever considered the symbolism of hair and how much value people put on it and the amount of assumptions that come with it. And it was really eye-opening to me when you were talking about, you know, you would look at other people and think about their hair or the choices that they'd made with their hair in relation to like you and things like that. And it was really interesting that now it's brought a new people watching experience, I guess, for me, where, you know, I think about it a bit more. And when I see people, I realize, oh, I've made an assumption about this person because they've got this type of hair or this hairstyle. And you're right, it has so much meaning.
Yeah, and some people might say, oh, but, you know, I don't subscribe to conventional beauty standards, and, you know, I don't find blonde women particularly attractive. But still, I think, I mean, at least for me, still I have my own kind of personal interpretation of different people's hair. Like in the book, I think I talk about if I see a woman like in her 40s who doesn't dye her hair, who has white hair visible, for some, like, I know, like, it's not very rational, but for some strange reason, like, it elevates my opinion of her. And I make certain assumptions about her. Like, I think, oh, she must be like, quite educated, or like she's somehow not as shallow as somebody who might bleach her hair. Yeah, all kinds of strange assumptions.
Yeah. And hair, I think, you know, is so tied to being nonconformist sometimes.
Yes.
Like people who dye their hair or they do edgy, well, what would be considered edgy haircuts and things like that. Like, again, that was just an aspect that I hadn't thought about at all. That you're right. Even when someone says, you know, oh, I don't conform to beauty standards, 9 times out of 10, they're probably doing something with their hair to show that they
Exactly.
don't conform.
Yeah.
Yes.
Conform. So,
Yeah, or maybe not shaving their legs
Mhm.
if they're a woman, you know,
Yeah.
is like has its own meaning in our culture.
Yeah.
what was it like writing this book and knowing that so many people would, one, be learning about something that they probably had no idea existed, let's be honest, and two, that you'd be sharing something that you've kept so private for so long and have had so much of a, I hate the word, but journey with, and so much emotion and shame with, to then be putting that out publicly?
So when I started writing the book, actually I didn't conceive of it as a book. In fact, I kind of had to deliberately tell myself that it was only for me.
Mm.
Like the other strange thing is that I've kept diaries for a long time, personal diaries. And even within my own personal diaries, I never ever mentioned the pulling. Like it was that kind of taboo that not only did I keep it secret from people around me, it was like secret even to my own personal diary. So the first step for me was to go and buy another diary. And that became like the secret diary that was like hidden in my room and that nobody knew about. And then, yeah, I tried to write about, you know, just to describe it in very loose terms, I couldn't do it. I just kept stalling and stalling and stalling. And then eventually I managed to begin to write about it. But yeah, quite a few journals worth of writing. I just told myself that it was only for me. Yeah, I kind of had to like work myself up to the thought of showing it to a reader and then to the thought of it being published. And then, yeah, like for me, there is a paradox because I am so secretive about it and I still am very, very uncomfortable talking about it. But for some reason, like I'm not so scared by the fact of people reading the book.
Mm-hmm.
Partly maybe that's because readers will be strangers to me. And partly I think it's because I'm in total control of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've spent years kind of shaping things and fleshing things out to create something whole and something, you know, that's going to put the illness in context and, yeah, hopefully make sense to a reader.
How long did it take to write?
Oh, I never know how to answer that question. Because I mean, I work full time, and
Yeah.
so yeah, like I've done it in little bits,
Mm-hmm.
and also it was incredibly taxing to write.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I would do a bit and then have enough of it and then abandon it.
Absolutely fair. I would have been surprised if your answer was, I smashed this out in 3 months straight.
No.
Because as a reader, again, I had to step away and take moments to think about everything that you'd shared, that I cannot imagine if you had have been writing this just in a focused, intense period of time. I think
Yeah.
that just would have been insane.
Mm.
Did you feel like you needed to balance the emotional demands, I guess, of
Mhm.
writing the book with any specific self-care?
I guess for me, a lot of my working life is dealing with language. I'm an English teacher, or yeah, working on a computer. So for me, I struggle with practices like mindfulness where I need to be still and sitting. So for me, I find what's helpful is anything kind of physical that gets me moving. So yeah, like exercise, I came to fairly late in life, and now I exercise very, very regularly. Or something like swimming or hiking. Yeah, those are the kinds of things that I find most helpful.
So, Adele, aside from your incredible and important book, and the only thing that I personally have read about trichotillomania, can you tell us if you've come across any representations of pulling or skin picking, nail biting, anything like that, that you would recommend to our listeners, and also just like resources in general?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the crazy things actually is even though not many people know about this condition now, there are actually a lot of references to it historically in places like the Bible, in Shakespeare, different works of literature. More recently, though, and I talk about her in the book, there's a Mexican writer called Guadalupe Nettel, and she has a short story, Bezor. And in it, the narrator is addressing her therapist, and she's describing trichotillomania, but she never ever uses that word. She describes it, I think, as her intimate space. And that story felt incredibly important to me when I came across it, because it was the first time that I read about it in a context that wasn't, a clinical study or an academic book. So yeah, I would highly recommend her story. In terms of resources, there are 2 online resources that I would highly recommend. So the first one, the name is TrickStop. So that's a platform specifically for the treatment of trichotillomania. So it has an online kind of community. It has therapists that you can work with. And it also has this amazing archive of webinars, and they're all completely free to access. And They cover like this enormous range of topics. So to give you a few examples, there's one on hair pulling as self-soothing, there's one on neuroplasticity, there's one on boredom as a trigger, there's one on the meaning behind pulling. So like it's incredibly comprehensive. And it's designed by therapists who are like world experts in this condition. And then the second is, again, online. It's called TLC Foundation for BFRB. So if you just enter bfrb.org, it should come up. So BFRB is kind of an umbrella term for body-focused repetitive behaviours. So that has all kinds of information and resources related to hair pulling, but also to skin picking and nail biting.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so those 2 resources, I think, are the best that I have found.
Those are fantastic resources, Adele. Thank you. I'm going to be using them myself, I reckon. But also thank you so much for coming on today to talk about the book and about pulling and everything. It's, as I already said, it's a very important book for me, as it's the first thing that I've read that hasn't been medical, academic, whatever, about this condition. And so I'm just very thankful that you've written it.
Thank you both. Like I mentioned in the book, I've never really met somebody before with this condition, even though I've actively tried to seek people out. So yeah, it's been great to talk with you, Lachlan, and Jacinta. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Our pleasure.
Of course. Like you said, it's, Lachlan also hasn't met other people with the similar conditions. So it's just been nice hearing both of you speak, honestly. And it was such a privilege to read the book. It's so important for any reader who's listening who, thinks that they don't have a connection, or maybe they, wouldn't find the book engaging. That is absolutely not true. Everyone should read it, just because it's so beautiful, so intimate, and such an experience in empathy and just sitting with someone else. It's really beautiful. So thank you so much for coming on and being so open with us. I know it's probably still hard to talk about sometimes. So we really, really appreciate just, how honest and open you've been with us.
Thank you.
For anyone who wants to know more about Adele, we'll have popped the link to the pulling in our show notes, as well as a link to her first book. We'll pop her... Are you on Instagram, Adele?
No, I'm on Twitter.
Great.
Cool.
We'll pop Adele's Twitter in there, and, any other bits and pieces, as well as the resources that she shared today. If you want to come and hang out with us, we have a very special Facebook group that is slowly growing and just the most beautiful thing. We love people coming in and chatting to us, so you can go and find that in the show notes as well. Otherwise, we're on Instagram. You can email us. But thanks for listening to another episode.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Differently Brain shares the opinions of individuals and does not consider your personal circumstances. Differently brained exists purely for information purposes and should not be relied on as health or medical advice. Because no brain is the same, please consult your healthcare professional for your personal medical needs.